Hello and welcome to the Deb Calvert channel on Bright Talk. This is Deb Calvert, and I just want to thank you for being here. Those who are listening live, it's a short week and a busy day, and you've taken some time out to be here. I appreciate it. Those who are listening on demand, thank you for that too. I just am so honored that you come back month after month to pick up these presentations, part of a 12-part series once a month that is for sales managers who are looking to build their skills in a variety of ways, mostly around doing both, managing sales and leading people. Today, what I want to talk about are sales competencies, what they are, how to make sure that you have the right ones, how to make sure that you're hiring for them and building them in the members of your sales team. I think that this is an important topic because all too often we hire without we're hiring and what we're hiring for. So there's some discussion. I'm going to start out, though, with an introduction for those of you who are not familiar with Bright Talk, a few things I want to let you know about logistically. First of all, one of the things I like best about Bright Talk is it allows me to load up the bonus content. And I've given you some things that you can take away and use after the presentation. You'll find those in the Attachments and Links tab. And already to notice two things right off the bat. I've given you an attachment that is a handout of the slides I'll be reviewing today. So if you want to take that now and print it out, I know some of you like to take notes as we go. The other thing I want to point out right now is that I would like us to have a conversation while we're together here today and beyond. And for those coming in later on demand, feel free to reach out to me as well. I've given you my LinkedIn profile link, and I hope that you'll come on over there and connect with me if you haven't already. To get the dialogue started today, please, for those listening live, please go ahead and give me your questions and your comments as we go. I will try to take those as they make sense during the presentation. Any that I don't get to, I'll certainly pick up at the end. And any that you want to go in depth with, just go ahead and post it, but say it's for offline. I'll connect it and give you a call or send you an email. We can certainly do that. Okay, I want to get started. I do want to say that I welcome your questions and that I really appreciate your reviews at the end. That helps me to know what you like and would hope to see more of, as well as what you'd like to see me doing differently. So don't be shy. Post questions, post a review. Let's do this thing together. Sales competencies. Really, that's just a fancy way of saying scientifically what you're looking for in a candidate. Beyond the job description, beyond your gut feeling, beyond what you know but have maybe not articulated, competencies define what it takes for someone to be successful in any job role. You want three types of competencies. You want, for your job candidates, the ones who come in, the ones that you select, you want them to already know certain things. When they walk in the door, what do you want them to know? You might find it useful to jot down a list of the first things that come to your mind. I'll show you some samples in a minute, but it's going to be unique to the job role that you're hiring for. So what do you need those candidates to know? The second thing to think about is what types of things do you need them to be able to do already? What skills do you need them to have? And the third thing is what are the characteristics or the traits that you would like your candidates to possess? The people that you hire, what do you want them to know? What do you want them to already be able to do? And what traits would you like them to bring in with them? Those are the three types of competencies. Now, as you're thinking about this, you're thinking, probably your mind is flooded with all the things you'd like them to know and do and the traits that they ought to have. Think about your current sales team. Think about your recent hires. How often do you get all those things that you want, all those skills, all that knowledge, and all those traits? And how do you even know? Sadly, way too many sales managers don't know until it's too late. They've already hired the person, put them through onboarding and training, waited and waited for them to ramp up and to start posting numbers, and it just never happens. And when I come in later to try to coach and train and help sales teams, often it's because these problems are because they don't have what it takes. And now we have to go through the messy process of separating someone for the organization and then starting from scratch to post the job and fill the territory and get somebody onboarded and trained and ramped up. That's a lot of wasted time and expense. Much better to bring in the candidates who are able to do what they need to do, know what they already need to know, and have the right traits. Now, here's something to think about. This is really important. You can teach people how to do things, and you can equip them with the knowledge they need to have. They can learn it. So if you have to choose between these three categories of competencies, the one that you really need to think about most are the traits, the characteristics that they bring in, because you're not going to impart traits to an individual. You can train them knowledge and skills, but you can't force them to bring in certain innate characteristics that you might need to have. Okay, let me keep going here. I'm going to try to bring all this together and have it make more sense. Now, when you build out this list of competencies, rather than just it being this great big nebulous thing, this description of who you ought to hire, you're now going to have something more concrete. You're going to have a profile of your ideal or your perfect candidate. Your perfect candidate, the ideal one, would have all the traits that you've listed, all the knowledge, all the skills, and all the traits that you'd like them to have. That's your ideal. That's collectively everything that you're aiming for in your perfect sales candidate. Two things to note. First of all, this isn't going to be the same for every job. If you hire SDRs and you hire account managers and you hire for enterprise sales as well as for your new SaaS solution that's going to be sold to SMBs, those 4 different job roles would likely have 4 different sets of competencies. So this is not company specific, it's job specific. And for everybody in the same job role, you would have then the same competency model or framework. So define these competencies based on the job role. Once you have it, you now know what your perfect candidate is all about, what they know, what they can do, and what traits they have. Now we have to do a reality check here. Of course, as in anything in life, there is no such thing as perfection. We are developing that perfect ideal because that's what we're aiming for. And that's now the standard that you can measure every single candidate against. You will be hiring the candidate objectively who comes closest to the ideal. You might not get someone who's all the way there, but you're going to then back it up with giving them the knowledge and the skills that they need because you emphasize the traits, since you know you can't give those to somebody when they walk in the door. Now, I promised you I'd give you a little bit more detail about what this all looks like, so I'm going to keep breaking it down. These are just some examples. These are not something that you want to cut and paste and use for the job that you're hiring for. This is just meant to give you the flavor of what knowledge competencies might encompass. The reason to have knowledge competencies is that your new hires, they need to know some things. Right? They need to have a certain level of knowledge, for example, about business in general. If they're a B2B sales rep and they're calling on people in a certain industry and they are going to have a measure of credibility, well, they might need to know how businesses work. They might need some fundamental knowledge about how a profit margin is derived, or about the kinds of pressures facing the people in the C-suite that they're going to be calling on. Whatever it is that you need them to know, you'll then think about how much of that they need to come in the door with versus what you're going to train them on. Great example. Maybe you need them to have a high degree of industry knowledge, but they don't need to know much at all about your product. In fact, you'd like to train them entirely in your product and its functionality and how you want it to be represented in the marketplace. So you won't have all these competencies. You'll have some, and they might not even be on this list. You'll have some that are more important than others for people to walk in the door with. Then we have skills competencies. These are the things that you want people to be able to do. I've given you just a few choices here. I think that it's important to consider skills competencies that are current, because we know that this is always evolving. For sales in general, it's always evolving. I put right at the top of the list critical thinking for problem solving, because that competency, just like listening would be another example, those are two things that buyers are expecting more and more. And with the complexity of selling, not even just to mention the complexity of your products and the work that your sellers have to do, overall complexity is increasing. We need people who are able to think on their feet, to be able to make well-informed, quick decisions, to be able to solve problems creatively. All of those are critical thinking skills. And because that's an emerging skill, you might find that it's not one you've thought about hiring for in the past. Maybe it's one that's a deficit in your sales organization. If you want to know anything more about critical thinking skills, I've given you, in the attachments there, I've given you a link to a 40-part video series. Don't worry, that's not as bad as it sounds. Each of those videos is only about 5 minutes long. But you can go in and select the ones that are titled in ways that you think will be of value for you or for members of your sales team if they need some of that support. So whatever it is, what skills do you need people to have? Do they need to already know how to use a certain CRM platform? Is that absolutely essential when they walk in the door? Or do they need to be able to make strong, compelling presentations? Do they need to demonstrate to you that they have the skill of data analysis and being able to spot trends? Right? This is going to be different for every single sales role in every single company. This is only a partial list. You'll have to think for your jobs, each one of them, what do you need people to be able to do? And what will you be willing to teach them and resourced and ready to teach them if they don't have it when they walk in the door? Finally, here's the one I said is probably the most important when you're hiring. These are, again, just some examples of the kinds of traits or characteristics you'd want to hire for in a salesperson. You won't be able, not easily, you won't be able to make someone be resilient or empathetic or curious. So your best shot at having those traits that are important for your salespeople to demonstrate, your best shot at that is to hire people who already have these traits. Now, we could make a very long list of traits. We could have the ideal, perfect sales candidate loaded up with lots of skills and knowledge and different traits. That wouldn't be very practical. We're looking for the ones that truly make the biggest difference in whether or not a salesperson is successful in your organization doing that one particular job role. Well, how do you know that? Good question. I'm going to give you 3 ideas about how to start narrowing it down. First of all, there are some universal sales competency models out there, and they're very good. They're based on a sampling of salespeople from all different types of sales roles in all different sorts of industries. They give you a starting place. I would suggest using them as idea generators so that you are thinking about what fits for your organization and sales roles. Those competency models, 2 of the best, come from ATD. You do have to be a member to be able to download that. And then the other one is from Objective Management Group, OMG. They publish at least a high-level overview of their sales competencies, so you can go and find those online. or consider buying them directly from either of those resources. Second place, you can get some ideas about the competencies that you might choose. Well, I think it's really smart to spend a little time observing your most successful salespeople, because you'll be able to notice your most successful salespeople, as compared to your least successful ones, they know some certain things, and they do certain things very well. And you'll notice, as a group, those most successful sellers, they probably have certain characteristics in common. And if you can observe and identify that, because it's inside your own organization with your own customers selling your own products, that's your very best indicator of what the right competency choices would be. The third resource to think about is, what do buyers want? What do buyers want to see from the sellers they choose to do business with? And I can point you toward a body of research that I recently conducted. It was through Santa Clara University in a panel study with B2B buyers. And we then interfaced with that with seller-side research to see what matched up when sellers were self-reporting on their own personal best in selling. So from that, we were able to extract behaviors and some traits of sellers when they are at their best, making extraordinary sales, and buyers are saying, yes, that is the type of salesperson I want to do business with. And if you want to learn more about that, it's all reported in a book we wrote called Stop Selling and Start Leading. I think I gave you a link to that attachment too. So a link to that book on Amazon. Okay, so these are the kinds of places. Those are just 3 ideas. But what you're looking for won't be arbitrary. You don't want it to be random. You don't want it to be guesswork. You're looking for, what is it that your salespeople know and do, and what are the traits they have that make them successful? Because that's what you want to replicate. That's what you want to hire for. I'm going to take a little tangent here just to talk about, why does any of this matter? Because I know right now it sounds like it's a lot of work. So why bother? Why do any of this? Well, it's because, as you might know from your own experience, having open territories really takes a toll. Research tells us that a vacant sales territory can cost an average of 250% of the total compensation during that equivalent time period. So whatever you would be paying a salesperson in total comp, multiply that by 250%, that's how much you're losing in lost opportunities, lost sales. And that's just direct sales. There are other hidden costs too, because whoever's covering that territory, they're experiencing some burnout, and those customers aren't as satisfied, and of course errors are being made, and it's probably taking a toll on you too as the sales manager. You're having to spend time hiring and waiting for that job to be filled, and you're probably doing a lot of backup work as well. And because of all the burnout and your lack of availability and the poor customer satisfaction and the time it takes to hire and ramp up and train, all of that can create a vicious cycle, because those negative effects, that they're continuing to swirl in the interim, the transition time. And pretty soon, before you know it, you've now got 1 or 2 other salespeople who are quitting because it's become so negative. It's become so hard to be successful as they're covering all that extra work. When that happens, it's really difficult to build depth on your team. So it matters for all those reasons, plus the obvious ones, like the better job you do of hiring, the better fit you'll have, the better the performance of that salesperson will be, and the better the fit, the more they bring in the door, the faster the ramp up is going to be. You're going to have improved retention because you've got the right person. It's not a gamble. You don't have to roll the dice. You'll have job descriptions that are more accurate. You'll have customers who are more satisfied. You want to spend time getting this right, and doing it once is much better than doing all that guesswork and rolling those dice. Okay, so as I said, we're going to look for the perfect candidate, the one who is the closest match to the competencies that you selected. the one who has the traits that are most needed in your sales organization. Oh, and because you have created this competency model as the measuring stick for your candidates that you hire, you're going to be much more objective than your current sales hiring practices. You're not going to be relying, and I know this is going to hit you hard here when I first say it, but you are not going to be relying anymore on gut instinct. And as good as you think your gut might be, there's an inherent flaw in hiring by gut instinct. For one thing, it sets you up for some risk. If you ever have a candidate who comes along and says that your hiring practices were unfair, you could be in a little legal hot water. You might, if it's all by gut instinct, you might not be creating equitable and positive applicant experiences. And that does put you at legal risk. It also puts you at risk of not truly selecting the best, most qualified candidate who is more likely to be successful. Because you know what happens when we hire by gut instinct? There's no way around this. It's human nature. What you're really hiring or trying to hire, what you're favoring is a mini me, right? A mini you. You're trying to, without even realizing it, because we have unconscious bias, you're trying to find the person who is most like you. And that's not the person necessarily who's most likely to be successful. And even if it's true that someone just like you is what you need, then you need to turn that into a competency framework. If you are the most successful salesperson, figure out why. What are the skills that you consistently applied that made you successful? What do you know that others would be successful if they also knew? And what are your traits? Go ahead and articulate them. What are your characteristics that for sure made you successful as a salesperson? Not just made you likable, not just made you the person that you're proud to be, but made you successful in selling. That's what we need to know. And then we're going to put all of this into a process. You're going to get your competency framework, and I want to show you now how to use it. We're going to use this in place, not in addition to, but instead of your traditional interview. You know, your traditional interview is where you spitball some questions, you find out if you are having a good conversation, and if you like the candidate. Maybe you're conducting a little bit of a role play like, hey, sell me this pen, you know, something like that. Right? The traditional interview, it often fails. And the reasons that it fails is that, well, first of all, these are salespeople. They know what you want to hear. They know that you're a little desperate to fill this sales territory, so they're going to tell you what you want to hear, and you're ready to believe it, so you're going to be pretty susceptible, easy to fool. There's no way around it. This is just what happens. And traditional interview practices, they also sometimes fail because people applying for sales positions, by and large, they're likable. And if they can read you, and if they are something a little bit like you, because of your urgency to fill the position, you will see what you want to see. You won't be looking as deeply as you should be. You won't be noticing some of the red flags that might be there because you're seeing what you want to see and you're eager to fill the job, and you have that natural tendency to hire people who are like you. When you do all of this, those traditional interview practices, they actually don't give everyone the same chance. You're not asking exactly the same questions. You're not setting up the dynamic and the feel of the interview in exactly the same way. It's causing you then to make comparisons between candidates that are not apples to apples. And that's problematic, as we said, including because it doesn't give you the best shot of evaluating candidates in a way that's going to be useful for you. Okay, so we want to be able to give ourselves the best shot That means that we're going to do things differently using our competency model. You are going to set up a different type of interview experience entirely. So I'm going to give you a rundown of best practices. You are welcome to be in touch with me now or later to ask questions or to get more information about what I'm describing. But what I'm describing is a proven framework. It works very, very well. The first thing that happens in this best case scenario is that you as the hiring manager are on a team of 2. There's another sales manager involved, or another HR person involved, or another partner manager. Could be any of the above. There are 2 of you. And you're going to manage your time very, very well in the interview. It'll be very planful so that it can be consistent. And you're going to conduct what's called a behavioral interview. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. This behavioral interview is going to last exactly 1 hour, not more. Not because you like the candidate, it goes on and on. It might be less if the candidate falls far short of what you need in this interview, and it's very apparent very quickly. And that'll happen when you adopt a behavioral interview framework. You won't be asking those traditional questions. You won't be asking things like, what are your strengths? Or if you were a box of cereal, what brand would you be? You're not asking any of those questions, no matter how clever they are. You're also not going to ask resume check questions. You won't say, tell me about your previous experience, because you've already got the resume to do that, and you will already have done a pre-call to walk through that. You don't need to spend your valuable time face-to-face with this candidate, giving them the floor so that they can tell you what you want to hear. That's just not very useful. It's too easy to prepare for, and it's too easy to fake your way through in an interview, and it's just low value. So you're going to trust the resume and verify the contents of the resume through pre-screening, through checking, and through questions that you might have asked before they ever came in your door. Okay, now you and your partner, the other interviewer, you're each going to have competency question sets that you ask. I'll show you what those look like in just a moment. You will have selected no more than 10, better yet, it's 7, 8, 9, but no more than 10 competencies that you're interviewing for. That means out of your great big list of all of the ideals, you have winnowed it down. You already took out the ones that you could teach people if they needed them, or that actually you already have embedded in your training and onboarding program. You've taken out the ones that are nice to have but not essential. You've taken out the ones that are lower priority because you're forced here to think about a maximum of 10. So what are they, those 10 that make it best case for the person to be successful? And out of those 10, you're favoring the ones that are traits or characteristics because you cannot impart those to an individual after they are hired. They have to come in the door with them. So probably out of your 10, 4, maybe 5 are traits, and the others are knowledge and skills that you couldn't glean from the resume. Now, a behavioral interview, what that means is that you are interviewing to understand what behaviors a person exhibited in previous situations that are similar to the situations they'll encounter doing business for you. In the job role that you're hiring for, there are going to be certain kinds of situations. And you need to be able to understand what behaviors your job candidates exhibited when they were in these situations in the past. And this is all based on a premise that goes like this. The best indicator of future behaviors are past behaviors. In other words, the very best way to see how someone's going to respond doing the job you're asking them to do, the best way to tell what they're going to do is what they've already done. So if you're going to have somebody on the phones doing an intensive cold calling, prospecting work, the best way to know how they'll behave in that situation is to understand how they have behaved in that situation in the past. That's what the whole idea of this interview framework is. By the way, when you do this, and you've got competencies and you're conducting a behavioral interview, your success rate of finding and hiring the very best candidate is going to skyrocket. You're going to have a lot less turnover, and you're going to have people ramping up and being successful much faster than interviewers who don't use a competency model and a behavioral interviewing framework. Okay, so we have to understand 3 things for every one of those important competencies. We have to understand the situation that they've been in so we can tell if it's similar to ours or not. We then have to understand the behaviors that they personally exhibited. And then we have to know what outcomes they got. What were the results when they were in that situation and demonstrated those particular behaviors? Now, as you're asking about these 10 competencies, and you're asking 3 questions, situation, behavior, and results questions for each one of those, that's like 30 questions, about 2 minutes for each of the competencies. You're not going to have your candidates asking questions at this point. Okay, this is one-sided. You'll reserve a little time at the end if they have some questions to ask. But you have information you need, so you're going to follow this process to get exactly what you need to know. Let me give you a couple of examples. Here is a question set for a competency. We'll call it account maximization. This is a skill that you've decided for this particular job is really important. Because in this job, it's an account manager job, let's say. You need people to do a very good job of upselling and growing revenue from established accounts. So you don't say to the candidate, you don't say, hey, in this job, it's really important for us that the candidate we hire is able to grow revenue from established accounts. You don't say that. Instead, you get them to tell you a story or a situation about a time when they've done that. Your situation questions, they're almost always going to be more like command statements because you need them to tell you. By the way, you'll set this up. You'll set this up at the beginning of the interview. You'll say, in this interview, I'm going to be asking you about very specific situations because I want to understand specifically what you did and what results you achieved in those situations. You tell them up front what you're looking for, and then you ask question sets for each of the competencies that you selected. You pre-planned this with your co-interviewer, so each of you have about an equal number of competencies that you're asking about. And the reason that you always ask the same ones is that you're making this interview as equitable and fair as it can be. Both of you are evaluating the candidates on every one of the competencies that you've selected. You'll have a matrix. I'll show you that in a moment. But you're looking to be as objective as you possibly can be and as equivalent in the interviews as you can be with each candidate. So you're asking questions like these. As soon as they tell you the situation, you follow that up with a question, a behavior question. Tell me a little bit more about what you did. What were the specific steps that you took to make that happen? And if you haven't heard it in their answer, then the next thing you ask is, well, what were the results? When you took those steps, what was the outcome? You need to get this complete picture. You need to understand the situation, the behaviors of this candidate, not their team members, not their manager, their own behaviors, and you need to understand the results. What happened because of their behaviors? Here's an example. It's just another question set. This one's for a trait-based competency. It's resilience. Describe that situation. You won't even use the word resilience. Don't feed it to them what you're looking for. But describe a situation where you experienced some significant obstacles. You want to hear the story. You want to hear them tell you about what they did to move through those hurdles. you want to ask these kinds of questions if resilience is important to you, because in a situation or a story, someone who's not very resilient, someone who is not likely to overcome hurdles, well, that's going to get revealed in the story. They're going to start blaming others. They're going to start making excuses. And that's something that you want to know about before you hire the person and find out that that's their tendency. So for every one of your competencies, for each of those competencies, you are asking a set of questions to reveal the situation, their own behaviors, and the results that they got. And as you're listening to the stories, you really want to tune up your own listening as they tell these stories, because you need to be able to identify any hedges or dodges or make-believe that creeps into their story. If you hear words like, well, in that situation, what I'd probably do, if you hear anything like that, or if you hear them say, well, typically our team, or they say, yeah, that happened one time, and my manager, those are all red flags, because what you're now hearing is hypothetical. It's not a real situation. Or what you're hearing is what other people did, and that's not relevant unless you're also hiring that whole team or that manager. What you need to hear is a real situation and the actual behaviors of that individual. It's not uncommon, by the way. The first one or two behavioral interviewing question sets that you use, it's not unusual for people to start with a hypothetical, because that's more often what they do in a traditional interview. So because you set it up and you told them, I'm looking for real situations with real examples of your behaviors and choices, you'll redirect. When they start to go down that path, you just remind them if they go astray. Oh, okay, I understand what hypothetically you might do that, but go ahead, take your time. Think about a real situation. I'm looking for an actual example of when you did this, when you encountered this. And if they can't think of an example, that might mean they've never done the work that you need them to do. Or if they start making excuses, oh, now you know something else about this candidate that's important to know. And if you go over this in every single question, they are just not giving you any actual specific examples, well, that's probably a pretty good indicator that this is someone who doesn't follow instructions very well either. You're going to get a lot of information when you use question sets that are behavioral interviewing, situation, behavior, results, SBR question sets. Okay, so you're asking those SBR questions. You're asking the ones that are about the 7 to 10 competencies that you selected because they're very relevant to that position. You know for certain that this is what it takes to be successful in that job role. And you ask exactly the same questions for every candidate that you interview for this job at this time. And you and your partner, your interview partner, as you're doing this, you're filling out a matrix. You'll have a Likert scale, a 5-point system, let's say, that says 5 is excellent, 1 is unacceptable, and you've got some choices in between there. And you are jotting down the reason that you give the score that you selected for each of those competencies for that candidate. And you're doing this in live time, jotting down those examples, picking your score as you go. That's one reason why you trade off who's asking questions and leading the interview as you go. You might even want to have, and discuss before all of the interviews, you might even want to have some positive and negative examples. Here's what resilience looks like. Here's what the opposite of resilience looks like that we don't want to see. And we're going to use these criteria, these predetermined criteria, to decide how to evaluate a candidate for every one of the competencies that we've selected. You'll talk about this ahead of time. You will not compare scores after each interview. You'll wait until you've interviewed all the candidates before you compare scores. And the reason for that is that you want two different opinions here. You don't want to influence each other's opinions and start to steer how you are scoring people in subsequent interviews. That's not fair, and it's not very useful. You're trying to keep this as objective as possible. By the way, you're going to almost always advance the candidates that have the higher scores. You probably are going to hire the candidate after maybe another round of interviews who has demonstrated that they have the highest scores compared to your ideal, because remember, your ideal candidate is the one who has all of those competencies that you selected. Sometimes this means that your favorite, the person you liked the best, they might not come out on top. And you need to be okay with that. If that's happening, it's telling you that you're not as objective as you think you are. If that happens, you probably ought to have a conversation with your human resources department before you ever move outside of your matrix to hire. Because you may not have solid, defensible, I'm talking legally defensible reasons for making a hire of someone who has not lived up to the ideal standard as much as someone else did. So you're going to tally these scores at some point after it's all done. You're going to make your decision objectively. You are going to hire someone knowing which competencies they absolutely have and which ones they don't, because no one's perfect. And knowing right from day one where they need a little bolstering and some shoring up and a little extra coaching and training, well, that's going to help you to make them more successful more quickly. You don't have to do any discovery work. You already know what they've got and what they don't. Now, I've given you a lot here to think about, and I put it all into an infographic so that you can have that too as a job aid. But what I want you to know is that here at People First Productivity Solutions, this is part of the work we do. We build competency models that are specific to an organization and even at the level of a job. And we then help you create question sets and matrices that are specific to that job. And we teach sales managers to become really good behavioral interviewers. We work with human resources departments so that they can partner with you in your entire selection process. And we can help you develop good role plays that also reveal additional competencies so that you have absolute certainty when you make a hire that it's going to be a very good hire, someone who can help you to be successful. If you want any of those services, don't hesitate to be in touch with me. I'm Deb Calvert. My company is People First Productivity Solutions. This is what we do. We build organizational strength by putting people first.